It's the rain, and it finds rain. What do I want to call it? Cousin, as a smart as convenient. Okay, should have done this before I started recording. Yeah. To explore, show to drown out of the sea. This shelter, okay, go on, Mike. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you. It is raining quite a bit, so if at any point you can't hear me, please let me know, because yeah, it's raining. And I can barely hear myself, but I still wanted to do this, and I'm really excited to do this, and I'm just happy to be live. And I wanted to talk about something really special that kind of building on this deeper body of intelligence in relationship to how we connect to and commune with nature. And the idea of presence as an actual form of communication with life and with the world and with ourselves that we don't often take advantage of because we're so socialized to these kind of places of thought and mentality and logic and language that exist above those places in our body. So we don't often harness what presence as a gift can offer to our spiritual process and our path in the world as primal human beings. In the way that our spiritual nature can commune through presence to us, it's huge. It's offers so much to this space and places where we feel like we can't comprehend something. And the mere act of presence alone, presence with life, presence with nature, presence in our body, can provide the answers and the solutions. It's quite untapped a realm of focus because we simply just don't understand that it even is a channel of communication. Oftentimes when we associate with the idea of like going outside, going into nature, going on a hike, we're going into that world and we're experiencing it and we're a part of it for the time being. But we don't actually consciously see the deeper channel of what's happening in those spaces and why it feels so good for us to be in those spaces. We're like, oh, it's just beautiful. But it's more than the beauty alone that stimulates us. It's actually the communication with life, with these subtle life forms that are living outside of our human bubble, the way they're communicating with each other, the way they're communicating to us, these deeper dances of subterranean signals that exist in these territories that we can go out and be entranced by and in wonderment with, because they pull us out of our minds. They pull us into this soft place inside of our core. Hold on, I'm gonna pull this up in case I get comments so I can see. But they pull us into this soft place inside of our core. Oh, yay, a person. Definitely, amen. Yay, person. So good to have you here. Okay. Hi, good to see you. I am dancing with my technology. I always, for some reason, when I'm live, it just goes haywire. Oh no, I don't want an immersive view. Anyways, we're talking today about I don't know what's happening. We're talking today about, as soon as I can figure this out on my screen. Okay, that's good. About what it entails to really understand and open yourself up to a relationship with the idea of physical presence as a form of communication and communion. There is a true language that is spoken through the kind of subterranean immersion with life that represents a really profound place of power for us, but we don't really have a lot of tools to conceptualize it, relate to it, or even value it. So it's often neglected as an aspect of our power that we don't really allow these deeper gnosis of that energy to flow through and pour into us with. So what I find when I'm out in nature, there's again more than just the stimulation of the beauty itself or the beauty alone. There's this deep slowing down into the space, into a different way of life that our modern world is not really as anchored to. And this way of life, it's deep and it's wide and it's slow. It's connected to these subtleties of signals that are constantly occurring, kind of like ping-ponging around this field of different life forms. And when you're slow enough to anchor to that place, you begin to become alive inside of that ping-ponging kind of communication. We're not outside of it in the way that we think we are. So even though we're coming from our little modern bubble and we're entering into these worlds, we tend to think like, okay, I am just going inside and I'm an outsider. And yet there's an actual deeper synergy we can tap into in regards to the life forms, in the way that they're communicating, in the way that they're seeing us and we're seeing them. And inside of that space, there's so much room for deeper pieces of awareness to reveal themselves to us. And these deeper pieces of awareness are pieces that we simply cannot substitute in any form of mental comprehension or computation, because they exist in the interconnectedness of what it is that we're observing. In this kind of higher intelligence, it's very adapted to your own kind of experiential immersion inside of it. So even though it's this kind of universal field that exists outside of you, it's living with its own life, it's going to keep living regardless of whether you're there or not. When you can open to it, your body can actually receive this heightened sensory internal kind of like messages from the land itself that speak to certain pieces of your path that you may not consciously know how to figure out or solve. And this is why many times we can kind of build a habit or a routine out of going out into nature when we need that relief or when we need that insight into our emotional space, into our creative process, into whatever it may be. We utilize the act of presence as a form of communicating with life to receive greater insight and intel around all of these kind of elements that maybe exist really outside of our own minds. And so there's space for you to actually start building in not only that when you're out in nature, but also just in your day-to-day life, looking at like, how am I allowing my physicality of my presence and my connection to the life forms around me to communicate to me? Am I completely blocked off to it? Am I really kind of walled to the other life forms because of how I'm judging them or how I'm seeing them? Because if that's present, then you may not be receiving some pieces of communication and insight into your power, into your embodiment that would be really, really valuable for you to open to. This is part of the reason this disconnect from presence and the value of presence is so ingrained into the modern world. It can feel really lonely in our just modern daily lives. We're walking around, we're surrounded by people, but we feel incredibly separate because we're in our minds and we're not in our bodies communicating in that communion of presence and all that presence offers. This is a really honestly elusive domain to apply language to. There's some elements of it that just feel so outside of the box of language. It's an experiential realm. And so you have to kind of open yourself to what that communion feels like in order to start seeing what it has to offer you and seeing what the value of it is there to bring spiritually, physically, creatively, and beyond. When you have these problems arising in your life, and you're like, I don't know how to solve this, I don't know what to do with this, I don't know how to clear this emotion, you tend to think in these black and whites of like, I have to figure it out with myself, I have to kind of hold myself in the space of strategy or logic, or just waiting for it to make sense, when the reality is you can be like, okay, this is a kind of blind spot in my mind right now. I can speak to life about this. I can take this to nature and receive insight. I'm not alone in my process. And the shift this creates is massive because it opens you up to this deeper field of interconnectivity where you see how much life really wants to support you and nurture you. And so often we're so blocked off to that because we think that it has to come through us alone, or our mentality, our minds, our kind of logical curation of facts and data, when the deeper reality is there is a greater intelligence to the force of life that we can commune with. But we have to know what it means to commune with that, because it's certainly not going out into nature and being like, hey, give me the answer right now. I'm not leaving till you give it to me. Because if we approach it in that transactional way, we're never going to actually receive through the way that it wants to commune with us. The way that it wants to commune with us is by way of our body synthesizing, attuning, in training to that external life force field. And then the life force starts to kind of like ripple and dance in communication to you. And we have to actually see it as a form of communication. We're so anchored to this idea of communication is language, it's words, it's this kind of very shallow experience of logical concepts that I string together in a very particular way in order to get my message out. And yet there's this whole entire subterranean realm of communication that exists in simply our body language alone. And beyond that, in the way life perpetuates outside of us in the life forms. So a random bird does not need to say, oh, there is an alligator approaching me in any other language other than like a squeak and a flying away in order to get that message across. And that's a lot of what's happening in nature. It's not happening in words. It's happening in these dances of, response, reaction, sound, sense, awareness, attunement, focus, engagement. And these things are aspects of our own communication that we don't really tend to value as much as the actual language of our mind and the words and the things that are really surface level. When you can go deeper into this space where you're receiving that other language and you're actually starting to anchor yourself to that language and really open yourself to what it's offering you, it's such a different depth of feeling supported by life and by nature, because you now have this kind of intimate relationship with life itself. And in that, your heart opens. The walls that surround you can melt away because you are connected to the actual body of life rather than the idea of life. And the body of life is this fabric that will continue to exist regardless of how our society stands in relationship to it. Our civilization exists atop of that body of life, And yet underneath, it's this teeming wild force that we kind of completely shut ourselves off to. We shut our minds to and don't really allow ourselves to harness in the way that we can to drive our expansion and our evolution. There's a slowness to that pace of life that can feel really hard to fathom when the way we've been socialized to such fast pace, kind of overwhelming stimuli and distraction. And if you don't allow yourself to attune to that slowness, then you miss the value. And it's not slowness in the sense of like action, because you have rivers, you have like rushing outpouring of avalanches and tsunamis that happen in that field that are quite fast paced. It's more so the slow pacedness of the breadth of your awareness, that it doesn't need these like immediate ticklings of stimuli in order to feel like something's happening. You can be with the slowness of like, I'm just staring and I feel the wind, and that wind is like just gently tickling me. And that's in and of itself stimulating. I don't need it to be like a tornado, a hurricane, in order for myself to feel like I'm a part of something. I'm engaged with something. I'm connected to the fabric of something living, some living force. It's talking to me. It's speaking to me. And it's telling me something if I'm able to just be in that slow space of mind enough to receive it. Because the fast-paced mind, it's looking for the kind of shiny triggers of stimuli that it's consuming in this mindless way, because it's used to being entertained with digital technology all the time. And it's used to being stimulated with this kind of like addictive dopamine hits of meaning and message and lights and action and all of the fun things that we have created in our endeavors. But underneath that, there's just this like slow moving unfolding and unfurling of breath and wind and soil, and the feeling of soil in your hands, and the feeling of hearing the specific tonalities of birds as they communicate with each other, and listening to the kind of like textures of the sounds of those communications as they're happening, and feeling the presence of an animal staring at you, and you stare back at it, and you connect and you receive. And this is just happening so below the kind of fast pace, you have to constantly be feeding your mind with information or entertainment or consumption or stimuli or lights and colors and saturation of things that are manufactured to provide the most intensified sensory experience for you, that kind of again desensitizes you to that slower moving unfolding of life and the actual ancient weight of life that exists outside of our modern bubble. And it's that fast, distracted mind that is the kind of poison of so much of modern society, and our sense of like, why is there not leaders? Why is there not direction? Why is there just this constant sense of churning out and disposability, and this constant sense of like, just consume it and make something new, consume it and make something new. There's no lasting anchors, roots, or foundation in a lot of society in its modern time. People just want to be entertained and then chew things up and spit them out and start over in relationships, in entertainment, in our relationship to art and culture and leaders as a whole. We're constantly looking for the stimulation because our minds have been socialized to that realm. And it's very, very kind of debilitating to the deeper soulful evolution and maturation of our true physical embodiment in relationship to our spiritual power. Because the spiritual power we carry, it's not meant to be channeled into these like really fast hits of stimulation. It's meant to kind of be something we slow down and savor into these boxes of power that can only really be perceived when we have this understanding of the timing, the patience, the slowness of that unfurling. If we're constantly looking for our spiritual power to kind of glamour to, what's the word? Basically the idea of glamour, but the word is like to entertain us and kind of just pop up like fireworks for us all the time, we're going to have a really unhealthy relationship to our spiritual power, because we're going to expect it to be doing all these things for us, and we're going to miss it in the slow whispers that are there to actually hold us and to actually commune with us the answers and the solutions. When we lack that comfort with the slow pace and the slow expression and the slow language of presence and communication, we lack a lot of embodied power. Because if you can think about the mind that's constantly stimulated, it's just so scattered. It's so scattered, and there's no room for it to fall into the body alone. And the body is that channel that connects us outwards, and that connects us to the power of connection in and of itself, whether it's, in nature or in the broader scheme of society. If we don't have the ability to be present inside of our body, we don't have the ability to actually influence the world, because we're scattered and we're out of touch with our instrument, in a sense, that is the connecting agent between us and life, between us and other people, between us and an industry, between us and a community. Our instrument is something we have to occupy in order to have any sense of sway or just offering to this world in a substantial way. We kind of really idolize the idea of these like glamorous coming into power, like overnight success and virality and all of these things that happen so fast, but it's happening outside of you a lot of times in those cases, and there's not a lot of space for you to actually hold yourself in relationship to those blossomings, those coming into, those unfoldings. So really getting back into touch with what is real, what is true, and this deeper communion with you and the forces of life as a whole, it does so much to kind of put things into perspective around what's really important on your path. Because again, so often we idolize the kind of glamorous sense of what we think we should be doing, and we ignore the subtle whispers of the wind and the slow pace of life and the kind of deeper communion with our body and with our emotions and with the people around us. And because of that, we miss out on these deeper spaces for us to occupy, which would do so much to move us forward. Because we're so focused on these kind of outer pieces of like, this has to happen in order for this to happen, in order for that to happen. We miss out on what's right in front of us and what's communicating to us right now in this very space, in this very moment. We lose touch with that, and we become debilitated and forced to occupy our mind as this vehicle of movement forward. Because naturally, if we can't see the communication that's happening in relationship to the life forces around us that's giving us the piece forward, naturally we're not going to know how to open to it. Naturally, we're going to suddenly feel like we have no other choice. Naturally, we're going to just go to where society conditions us is the domain, the home of the mind. And then we're going to get stuck in this kind of frustrating spiral of like, I'm always looking at where I want to go, but I'm never feeling it. I'm never feeling my connection to it. I'm never feeling in my body the actual sensations of that place I want to go. I'm always just thinking about it. And you can only get so far when you're thinking about where you're going. At a certain point, you actually have to communicate with that which you want to step into. And it's that communication, that communion, which requires the most kind of vulnerability. for the mind that has been so conditioned to the fast-paced stimuli of non-presence, I will call it, and make this easier. There's a lot of terms in terminology within this space that aren't really defined by the greater collective and world as a whole. So it's hard to, like I said, bring language to it. But it's really just important to understand the success we're seeking to create, the places we're seeking to stand in, the industries, the creative processes, the things we are drawn towards. They're not just static mental concepts. They're living, breathing bodies that have come together to create a specific space. In order for us to stand for anything inside of that space, we have to attune to the communication of those bodies and what they desire from our body in order for us to be a thriving, healthy part of that system. So you have to sort of get out of this isolated identity and more into the embodied presence of life as a connected field. And when you're in that connected field, you do things much differently because it's no longer about this is my mind and this is the action and this is the strategy. It's now about this kind of deeper response with things outside of yourself that are speaking to you, that are telling you what is needing to happen in order for you to get to where you want to go. And this is where it's much more delicate. The act of leadership is incredibly delicate because it's not about the power alone. It's about the body's response to the power. These bodies that you're governing, these forces that you're influencing, they're in their somatic trauma and power and space responding to everything you're providing them. And you are influencing that. And you are feeling that. Even if you're not consciously aware of it, there's some part of you that feels it and realizes it. And if you don't have these awarenesses, you're going to feel really overwhelmed by that weight, that responsibility, that space of influence. The more your body opens to the communion of life as the kind of foundation over the mind, the more you begin to understand the deeper laws of what it means to step into your power and what it means to actually stand for the evolution that you're here to lead, and truly recognizing like all of these elements of pain and pleasure and life and death and the flow of life in and of itself. It's all existing through you and around you and within you. And you are able to get into that water, into that river, and begin to expand through that space. You don't have to just, workshop your path in this corner of your room, completely separate from the world. There's space for you to open to the deeper communion and the surrender into the heart of life as a force of growth, evolution, and expansion and communion ultimately. Because it's that communion that it makes these elusive, esoteric concepts, they just make so much sense when you're in your body. It's like this shift from the actual kind of like strata and fabric of something into the like, oh wow, I'm living this, I'm seeing this reflected. And when you start to actually see these things reflected, there's more permission for your body to work those flows of power, to work those pathways, to kind of drive them in the way that you desire, because it's not so isolated anymore. We forget sometimes how much we as humans grow through the act of mimicking. And we just kind of like stick ourselves in these boxes and expect things to grow without remembering that we're always going to be, at least in this body, in this lifetime, in this experience, these creatures that need models of resonance to step into certain things. And we could deny that for ourselves and pretend like we have all the answers, or we can humble ourselves to life and know that whatever's living in us and trying to find a pathway is most likely living outside of us as well. And we can find that pathway and flow into this higher form of collaboration and communion that's really there to give us this space to breathe and to slow down and to trust and to open to in such a profound way. So yeah, I would suggest as just try cultivating your presence and your ability to be present like a muscle. That's something that once you really start to open, you experience the kind of flow of communication and you can never go back. But you really do have to kind of anchor yourself underneath the modern mind, because the modern mind does not value that space in the body. It doesn't care. It's much more attuned to the immediate dopamine that it can somehow manufacture and engineer. So you do have to train yourself to open to it. But once you're there, it's something that really profoundly alters the spiritual trajectory of your journey and the power you're capable of holding and hosting in this world. And there's just something really incredibly beautiful about being able to talk to animals and communicate with them and feel them and live in alignment with animals and life forms and the smaller realms of things. It's just nourishing in a way that's nothing else can substitute, because it's that interconnectivity. It's that feeling like I belong, regardless of how the world has treated me, how this society has treated me. I belong in this body, connected to life. And that space of belonging is what gives you so much room to stand in your true leadership, because you're no longer so sourced to this false matrix collective that's like, you need to do this in order to be one of us. Well, I don't care. I mean, I'll chill with my lion friends. Like, have your society. I don't care. I'm going to just do what I want to do because I am a part of something that holds me. I don't need you. I like you. And if you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you, but I don't need you. And yet we do. And there's space for it to be a both and sort of thing. But the deeper reality is a lot of times we fight the ownership of our power because we don't see how it fits into the world, and we don't know how to kind of stand for it if we don't have that model or that template of resonance. But nature will provide you that model if you can just open your presence to communicating in that realm, in that space. You will receive it and you will feel safe to be all that you are, because there's such a vast depth of power in the natural intelligence of life that we just forget, because we're so socialized to this shallow non-presence. It's more mental satisfaction and consumption. So we don't see. And we don't see, we don't feel. And we don't feel, we don't open. And when we don't open, we don't expand and influence. So it's kind of a bottom up way of growing and trusting in your path, that even no matter how advanced you are, you can always go back to this space and find a deeper sense of like, okay, how much more can I be held by life? How much more can I feel safe inside of this interconnected web? Yeah. But I would really suggest training it and training yourself to go to that world, because it is a separate world. It's something you kind of have to disconnect from our modern matrix in order to step into. And you just have to get that really, I'm checking to see, I have comments. You must meditate daily to communicate properly with source. Oh, hi, Jen. And Natalie, it's so good to see you guys. But I would say meditation daily, it's not as strict as that. I don't think it needs to be as prescribed in this really strict sort of way. And again, that has to do with this kind of need to control Whereas when you're living inside of life, there's this vast amount of variables and variability that really touches upon so many different things that could mean what you're seeking, like meditation, communion, all of these things. They exist in a lot of different forms that don't need to be this strict prescription. If that works for you, that works for you. And it's really good. Like, it's good to find what works for you and hold yourself into a routine and a habitual relationship with it. But there's also a lot of space for things to be very different for other people, and to kind of know what it means is to truly, again, be in communion, because communion it just takes you to a different world. It takes you to a much different world. And the only thing you need to worry about getting to that world is, how do I disconnect from the false one? If it's through meditation, that's beautiful. If it's through dance, that's also beautiful. If it's through nature, that's also beautiful. Whatever it is, though, there's a space for you to find what it means, and there's a space for you to know what it means to maintain that integrity as well. Because there's always going to be times where you can enter that world half-ass and kind of like, oh, I'm here, but I'm not really here. You need to be here. And that's an integrity piece that only you will know. Only you can know what lines to cross and what it means to maintain that for yourself. Yeah, so it was nice to connect with you all. I'm glad I got to see some of the comments. Do you have anything you want to ask or add, Florian?
No, it was quite insightful. Actually, I feel it also my body being more present, and
Yeah,
quite a nice feeling.
Yeah, good. That's really what it's about, is that kind of like opening to that space. And it's so funny because there's so much power, and yet it's also so foreign to so many people in the modern world. You can do a lot to scare people in this space because they're not used to presence. They're not used to connection. They're not used to that intensity of eye contact and like, I'm listening to you, I'm feeling you, I feel your heart, I feel how closed off you are. It's quite scary for them, and which it can be fun to observe. Also a little disheartening in other ways, because you see how blind the world is to it. But the more you bring it into yourself, the more safe you feel inside of social situations, because it's like there's so much more room for you to just be in the kind of fun of it instead of the mental place. There's just a fun little dance of like, I'm this person and you're that person, and we're just life forces inside of this broader web. And there's room for anything inside of that, and it's really beautiful. It's a really freeing kind of embodiment, and nothing needs to mean anything inside of it, because it's just the movement of the energy that means something. So thank you for coming. I'm really happy you showed up, and it was great to be here with everyone. I just wanted to do this little live, and yeah, I'll be continuing in other ways and other forms, just building upon this body. And yeah, I hope you all have an amazing day. Talk soon.
You too. Bye.
Bye.